And in 604 BC, about a year after that probably, Habakkuk writes, and this is really interesting, in the Dead Sea Scrolls that we found in 1947 in Qumran, the best preserved and the biggest commentary of any book in the Old Testament is the one on Habakkuk. So we've learned a lot from that. And his contemporaries include Jeremiah, Daniel, Ezekiel. And he's just saying, will Judah have a chance? God, will your people have a chance? Habakkuk means embrace, and he embraces God, and he embraces others, and he asks God why. And the unique thing about Habakkuk is that the other prophets proclaim God's divine judgment. You listen to the judgment of God for your lack of obedience. Habakkuk asked God to bring it. Bring your divine judgment. Where is the hope? And so the first thing he does is he cries for help. And if you want to look there, verse 2, how long, O Lord, of chapter 1, must I call for help, but you do not listen? I cry to you violence, but you do not save. Why do you make me look at injustice? And you might be saying that in your life right now with what you were thinking about. Why do you tolerate wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. So he doesn't like this injustice that's going on, and neither do you. And in verse 4, he says, the law is paralyzed. Even though Josiah found it, and they did that, and they obeyed God, the law is paralyzed, and justice never prevails. Justice never prevails. Getting old strong there. The wicked hem in the righteous like me, Habakkuk, so that justice is perverted. And so his first question is, why does God permit injustice among his people? And it's a good question. And God's answer is, he's bringing the bad boys of Babylon to the scene of events. Verse 5. Look at the nations. This is God's answer to the first question. Look at the nations and watch and be utterly amazed, for I'm going to do something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told. I'm raising up the Babylonians, these bad guys, that ruthless and impetuous people. Now, raising up doesn't mean he's glorifying them. It means he's allowing them to come on to the scene of events, who sweep across the whole earth to seize dwelling places not their own. They are feared and dreaded people. They're a law to themselves. Think of that, a law to themselves. Do you ever do that? And do you ever do this? They promote their own honor. Do you promote your own honor? It's like the marketplace tells us to do that. Their horses are swifter than leopards, fiercer than wolves at dusk. Their cavalry gallops headlong. Their horsemen come from afar. They fly like a vulture swooping to devour. They all come bent on violence. They're bad people. Their hordes advance like a desert wind and gather prisoners like sand. They deride kings and scoff at rulers. They would do that publicly. They laugh at all fortified cities. They build up earthen ramps. They would build big piles of dirt to come up to a city wall and then conquer it. And they capture them. And then they sweep past like the wind and go on. And listen to this. Guilty men whose own strength is their God. And I want to ask you today, do you think there's even a hint of that in your life? Where your own strength is your God. Where your own strength is your God. Babylon was a wicked people. Zedekiah, who eventually was the last king of Judah, who gets taken into Babylonian captivity. Nebuchadnezzar had his eyes poked out after the last thing he saw, which was his two sons being killed in front of him. So that's what's embedded on his mind. That's the image for the rest of his life. They're a wicked people. And Habakkuk asks why. He asks why. And there's just a point I want to make here. Psalm 103:10 says, God does not give a one-for-one punishment for our sins. If he did, we'd be dead. Okay? Hebrews 10:10 says all sin is judged at the cross of Christ. And 10:18 says you're not going to add anything to it. Jesus was asking Luke 13, why are these bad things happening to good people? Is it because they're not quite obeying you just right? And Jesus says, no. He said in John 16:33, the bad things happen to good people here. That's what's going on here. And I do want to clarify, though, I think in my heart, there's damage when I sin, every time. And I do think in my heart, there's blessing when I obey, every time. So Habakkuk says, well, come on. Why would God allow wicked Babylon to punish the unrighteous Judah? He says in verse 12, O Lord, are you not from everlasting, my God, my Holy One? We will not die. O Lord, you have appointed them to execute judgment. O Rock, you have ordained them to punish. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrong. Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? Now look at that. That's really important. Verse 13 at the end. Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? Come on, God, grade on the curve. You have made men like fish in the sea, like sea creatures that have no ruler. The wicked foe pulls all of them up with hooks. And that's true. Nebuchadnezzar got this from the Assyrian kings. When they would take people captive from Israel and Judah, they would hook them through the nose and the mouth like a fish. 200,000 of them in one setting. Manasseh was one of those when he was taken captive as the king of Judah by Assyria. They'd hook them, so that's actually happening. He catches them in his net. He gathers them up in his drag net, which would be at the bottom in fishing, and he rejoices and is glad. Therefore, he sacrifices to his net and burns incense to his drag net, for by his net he lives in luxury. See, they got a lot going on. So it's a nice place. And enjoys the choicest food. Is he to keep on emptying his net, destroying nations without mercy? Why would you allow wicked Babylon to punish the unrighteous? You know, I can identify this with this really well, because I remember in junior high, this God grading on the curve thing really was a big deal to me. So I was a Christian. I grew up in the church. Was baptized when I was 9. And in basketball, I was working really hard. And I was praying. And I'd watch some kids in junior high that would drink a little bit and not work as hard, but they'd play ahead of me. They'd start. And I'd say, God, why? Why aren't you grading on the curve? And maybe you do that. God, I'm obeying here. What are you doing? You know, but the first thing in the embrace of hope, of God's embrace of hope, is to cry out to God. To cry out to God. Not necessarily go complaining to others. See, I started my study of Habakkuk thinking Habakkuk was a bit of a whiner. Philippians 2:14 that I quote in my home all the time to my children. Don't do anything and complain. Do everything without complaining. But there's something about taking, and how the psalmist does and how David does, taking, and to get this embrace of hope from God, taking that injustice that I perceive and crying out to God. And I concluded that he's doing a good thing here in taking it to God. Imagine in this concept of injustice, if just one of these stories was yours. A 12-year-old girl learns at school that her dad is dead because his vehicle was crushed by a truck, and it was a truck driver's fault. A young woman loses her mom to a premature heart attack. A woman loses her baby in the 9th month of pregnancy and has to deliver the dead body. A person loses relatives to a freak accident when a semi overturns on a family and crushes the entire family. After 37 years of marriage, an attractive, godly woman is abandoned by her husband. And I know you have stories that are similar. What if one of those stories were yours? What would you do? What if they all were the same person? Because each one of those stories is my mom's. And I've never heard her complain. I'm sure she's probably asked God why, but that's been between her and God. And I've just watched her do one thing, and that's commit her life into his hands. And that's the second point here, what Habakkuk does. So the first point, I want you to lift up your left hand, and that is to cry out to God, as if you're crying out to God for help. And that's to go ahead and keep them up. Your left hand. The first thing to embrace God's hope is to cry out to him. To cry out to him. And go ahead and put them down. Well, the second thing is we're going to commit life into his hands. I'm going to make a commitment of my circumstances, whatever that injustice is, to his hands. Look in verse 1. Habakkuk says, I will stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts. I will look to see what he will say. He's got imagery here as if he's looking out to see what the enemy's doing. But I think he's using that as imagery. What he will say to me, and what answer I am to give to this complaint.